All right. So we're here with Colleen Jorgensen, an osteopath in the neighborhood. We're more or less live both in Montreal, correct?
Yep.
And
West Island.
West Island, same here, West Island. And I thought it would be very, very fun to interview and ask some questions because a lot of times when it comes to an osteopath, I went to see my first osteopath this year. I
Okay.
was studying a lot, and my neck was getting really jammed up. And I went to a common friend of ours, her business, and I just said anybody that's around right now is very last minute. But I had seen somebody. But all that to be said, I respect everything in our field, But I didn't know much. I didn't know much about what exactly an osteopath was. I know osteo, and I was like, okay, I get that. I've known osteopaths throughout my entire career,
Yeah.
but even for somebody such as myself who I have a lot of experience, I still felt that if I don't know really, then I mean, a lot of people might not know exactly what it
Yeah, you're so
is.
right.
So let's start with the first question where I want to know what is an osteopath and if you could explain how it differs from other forms of medicine and therapy.
So you're starting with the hardest question
Yeah,
because
right off the top, let's get it out of the way.
get it out of the way. Even though I've been practicing osteopathy for 20 years, the hardest thing is to describe it with words. It is one of those things that I feel like you have to experience. But if I have to describe it in words, the thing that sets osteopathy aside, I think, is that it really recognizes that the body has an inherent capacity to heal. And we're not there to try to fix anything. We're there to try to offer like an assistance or a fulcrum so that we're capitalizing on the body's capacity to heal naturally. So, how do we do that? It's a manual therapy. And I think one of the things that makes it different from some of the other manual therapies out there is that we look at all of the different systems. So, not just the musculoskeletal system, but the visceral system, craniosacral, the endocrine system, all of the different systems. We're looking at how those systems work together because they're all interconnected. And we're always looking for the source. So by the time someone comes to us with a symptom, it's almost never that we need to treat where they're feeling their symptom. So the challenge is always okay. This is what your body is like giving you as the signal that you need to do something about this, but our job is to try to figure out where is it coming from. And that's I think what osteopathy is really good at.
I love that. I love that because I feel that that is so intertwined with how I conduct my business.
Fabulous.
As a personal trainer, throughout these almost 2 decades I've been doing this, I found that what really helped really get those results, that it doesn't even matter what the results are, what really helped me get those results were thinking about what's the full picture here before I narrow
Yeah.
in on let's say my back issues. Someone's hurting and they explain you in the most, as you would probably know, the most vague way. It's just around here. And you're like, oh, thanks, bud. But and then my head will instantly start to go like, okay, let's check out the knees, check out the feet, let's check out some things. But I like the fact that osteopaths seem to really think outside the box, which I'm sure throughout your many, many years of experience, it seems, I don't want to say like hocus pocus, but people are not ready for it.
Absolutely. And honestly, it sounds too good to be true. Like when people say, what does osteopathy help with? It's easier to say, what does it not help with? Because honestly, everything's on the table. There's the potential for it to help just about anything, but that sounds ridiculous,
Yeah.
right? It sounds like that's too good to be true. But the reason that it has the potential to help anything is because it takes this holistic approach of looking at the whole person, not just you and your symptom, but you as a whole person, emotions included. And finally, the science is catching up to how important the body mind connection is. So that's exciting. But osteopathy has always done that. And I think that's another reason why it's so successful, that it really looks at the whole person.
Amazing, amazing. The second question I had, I think we touched on it, which is the conditions treated by an osteopath. I mean, at the end of the day, it's similar to me in my situation where when I have a client, sometimes we could do, for example, I have a client that they were dealing with digestion. And if someone asked me what can I treat, it's not that I'm treating digestive issues, but when we work out, if we are consistent, we could increase inflammatory and
For sure.
anti-inflammatory
Yep.
cytokines. So if we have anti-inflammatory things going through the body, this could be beneficial in a different type of the picture. And for you, when you treat the different conditions, I can't ask you, that's a loaded question. We're going to be here for an hour, the different things that you could be
Exactly.
treating. But so, yeah. So what are some, and maybe let me tweak that. And
Yeah.
what are some popular, maybe common, I should say, what are some common conditions and ailments that you might typically see, you might typically treat?
So one thing I'll say is that a lot of people who end up in an osteopath's office are people who have like really complex issues. That maybe it's not just one thing, but there are multiple issues going on with many different systems, and they've kind of been to many different specialists and just aren't fully resolving their issues. So that's a lot of what we see. So that can present in so many different ways. Some of the common things are back and neck pain, post-concussion issues, digestive issues. We see people during and after pregnancy. We work with the babies. Um, Post-surgery is a big one. Cancer treatments. We do a lot of work with helping people. It's not that we can treat the cancer, but we can help the whole system deal with the cancer and deal with the side effects that they might be having from whatever treatments they're getting. So again, it's a tough question to answer because everything is on the table as a possibility to help. But what we tend to see the most is the things that are kind of complex, that have a lot of layers to them. And personally, I love that. I like the challenge of that complexity.
I love that. I love it. It's so great because it all comes back to what we were saying before about how we can't be so, I guess you could say, myopic. We can't be so
Yeah, tunnel visioned.
that's it. We have to take a step back and be like, okay, well, and the great thing about it is there was a fantastic class I took in one of my final year in the program, exercise science, and they were speaking about it was a pain management class, and he
Hmm.
spoke about this teacher was a, I don't even know if he I don't think he knows how good he is. He was amazing. He made out of the whole that portion of my degree, he was amazing, and he
Who is the
spoke.
teacher?
His name is Dr. Wasnowski Vu, and
Okay, no, don't know him.
he's a young physiotherapist who just got his doctorate in physiotherapy as well. And his specialty, from what I understand, is pain. But the thing about it that I love is that he spoke often about therapeutic alliance and how
Yeah,
building that trust with our clients
yeah,
can make a world of difference. And in osteopathy, as you said, you look at everything. I'm sure this is such a beautiful thing too, because as you develop a relationship with your clients, they start to trust and be more comfortable, which makes your job even easier because now
yeah.
they could allow you to do your thing even better as the therapeutic alliance builds. It's
Absolutely. And I think part of like one of the things that also makes osteopathy a bit unique maybe is how in depth we go with our first evaluation. We really want to hear about everything that's happened to you from the moment you were born. So just that, like I see people for an hour and a half when I see them for that first time. And sometimes we talk for a full hour before we actually do any hands-on. And so you really do build that therapeutic alliance in that time because sadly, our medical system, you don't get an hour with the doctor, you get 5, maybe 15 minutes. So you don't usually feel heard when you're dealing with something complex.
right.
So for a lot of people, it's the first time that someone is actually looking them in the eyes and really listening, really hearing and validating what they're going through. And just that has the potential to shift their nervous system into a state of comfort and connection. And then, yeah, their system is more open to respond well to whatever manual treatment I might offer.
Right. Okay. So it's perfect. A great segue into the next question, which is the techniques. I think that it would be fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that when we build that therapeutic alliance, listening is a massive part of your
Huge.
arsenal of
Yeah.
techniques, right? Because and I
Yeah.
think that's unfortunately maybe something that a lot of people are lacking, where just listen. Like just listen more. Maybe someone's telling you something, but it's how they're saying it as well. You can
How they're
see.
saying it. Yeah, watch the body language. Maybe they're going to try to rush through certain parts and you want to try to figure out why, or maybe they get emotional when they say certain things, or they tense up, or their breath changes. All of that is really valuable information for where I'm going to go with the treatment, for sure.
Amazing. And so listening, that's a clear one. And then is there any techniques that are interesting? So like I'm sure there's many things, but a part of the manual manipulation that you're clearly doing in osteopathy, is there something that I don't want to say in a brief way because that's really not fair, but how does it work? How does these techniques?
I think I know where you're going. So one of the things that I really appreciated about osteopathy was that, so let's say someone comes in with a back problem, herniated disc, like it's such a common issue, right? We learn so many different ways to treat the body for that one thing. So maybe we'll do a myofascial technique or muscle energy or a visceral technique, or maybe we'll do what's called a recoil or strain counter strain or craniosacral, like and. There's so many different options to choose from that part of it is me as the osteopath, what is my personality drawn to and body shape? Like I'm a very short person with short limbs. So there are certain techniques that don't work very well, like mechanically in my body. So I will naturally gravitate towards certain ones. Someone else will naturally gravitate towards others. But I love that there's all these different options. So if it doesn't work for me as the osteo, or if it doesn't work for the person in front of me, I still have many different things that I can choose from to try to help that one thing.
Okay. That's makes, I mean, it's tough I bet it's a very, because all your answers are phenomenal, but it must be so tough to try to narrow in on a
Yeah,
field that
it
you
is.
know what you're
It's so
doing.
broad.
It's so broad, but it's the person who is doing the osteopath knows the direction, even though it's broad, right? So like you know
Yeah.
exactly what you have to do, and the person just has to kind of, I guess, build that trust. When we think of the benefits, that as well, I think it's it's too much. I can't, the benefits. It's like, well, you're going to live better. You're just going to be a better you.
You nailed it.
Maybe I could ask you, how fast does osteopathy, I think I've been mispronouncing it. How fast does
No, it's all good.
osteopathy, how fast can we see benefits typically?
It's very unique. Every person is an individual, so it's not the same for everyone. Some people, it's the moment they get up off the table, they already feel a difference. For others, it can take weeks to months. It really depends. But to come back to what you were about to ask, I think is, some of the benefits. I think one of the things that I appreciate, so not everybody does this, but I like to explain what I'm doing and why. So I like to take people on the journey of, why am I working on your ears when you're coming to me for an ankle sprain? Like I like to tell them the anatomical connection so that they don't think that I'm a crazy person and that there's a rationale to what I'm choosing, and most people really appreciate that. And I think just that little bit of learning and then experiencing, oh, wow, she worked on my ears and something changed at my ankle. How cool is that? And it gives them a better sense of how it's all interconnected. So I think part of the benefits is that it gets people more in touch with their bodies. And we become more and more disconnected because everything is coming at us from the outside, right? Everything's online. We're connected to external things so much that it has become quite common for people not to be able to tune in and listen to what their body is telling them. So at least for that hour where they're getting hands-on work, they are spending an hour connected to their own body, and that has benefits that are way too long to list in this interview.
Yeah, I think that's great too, because when we start to talk to a client about the knee bones connected to the whole
Yeah.
song that we've heard
Mm-hmm.
once in our life, but when we understand that there's connections, I find that it almost has this ability to potentially it could potentially provide relief, where it's like we don't have
Yeah.
to think so much about like just the herniated disc,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
In one of my classes, we were talking about there was a study that was done. I don't know, I won't even be able to cite it, but I remember we were talking about a study where a massive percentage of people don't even realize they have a herniated disc. So what happens is
Yeah.
that we have to also understand that when we think herniated, we're thinking of like this thing popping out and it's like the end of the world. And then they get on your table or in your room or whichever, however it works. And then there's that whole, the benefit that is much more than just the work. It's expression. It's like telling them how it's getting done. Very, very vague for, I'm sure, people listening, but whenever you know what you're doing in what direction and what's the process of it, it's a
Yeah, it
very
takes the fear because as humans, one of our biggest fears is the unknown. And we don't learn about our bodies, right? To me, I think we should. I think that from elementary school all the way up, we should be learning about our bodies so that it reduces some of that fear. But that's not how it works right now. So when they come to us and we do explain how things work, and the example you just gave is a great one. We've learned in the last 15 to 20 years that, like you said, we used to think a herniated disc was a really big deal and had to be treated a very particular way. Now we understand, I think it's something in the range of 65% of people have a herniated disc and have no symptoms. So it's not only about the herniated disc. We also look at dissection, and when you dissect down to the disc, there is so much protection built in. The disc, like we have that term slipped disc, or my disc popped out.
right,
They can't do that.
right.
They are so securely knit to the bone and to each other that they are super firmly in there. We have layers and layers and layers of protection built into our spine, but we have this wrong image of how fragile these backs of ours are. And part of it is because it feels really brutal. If ever you've had a herniated disc or you've had just a back episode, it feels awful. It feels like it's fragile, but I hope everybody listening can understand it's really not. We are built with so many layers of protection that one thing your spine is not is fragile.
That's the thing, right? But the words that we use and how we say it, even as the professional, how we
Yes,
discuss with our clients and we tell them, I think apart from that therapeutic alliance we spoke about and how they're speaking, but also the way we're discussing with them and using empowering,
exactly.
terms, because
Yeah.
like you said, the education to our clients could go so far. So I love that. That's amazing. To become a trained osteopath, no, maybe not a trained osteopath, just simply to become an osteopath,
Yeah.
I've heard it's pretty intense.
It's intense.
So
So it's definitely changed. I'm a bit older, so I graduated back in 2002. So it's changed since then. So I'll speak to what it was for me. So it's still a 5-year program. At the time for me, it was a 5-year post-grad program. So you had to have a degree, a science degree in athletic therapy, physiotherapy, nursing, dentistry, something like that. And then it was a 5-year, at the time, part-time program. What I liked about that was we would do these 4-day weekends, and then I was already working as an athletic therapist, so you would go and apply what you learned right away, which is kind of nice, rather than studying for 5 years and then trying to put it into practice. So 5-year post-grad program, and then a thesis to defend. So yeah, it's intense, and it's a lot of studying. It's a lot of testing,
yeah,
but it's necessary because we're dealing with human bodies, so you want it to be rigorous for sure.
yeah, that is intense. I think it's so interesting. I was looking at um, what it would take to become an osteopath myself,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's like even if I became a physio or I became an osteopath or I became whatever I became, the way I look at it is that how many things can I acquire knowledge to help my client? So it's not like I'm
Yeah.
becoming, it's just that it's an extra tool for my tool belt. And I
Yep.
always think about that. That's why I was explaining just before we started. I was talking about my degree and why I deferred it to continue and continue. I'm
Yeah.
always looking for more. And I think that's great. It's nice to know that I think it's still 5 years from what I
It
understand.
is, yes. It's
And
5 years, or if you don't have certain courses beforehand, it could become 7 years because you can do the pre-courses
right.
within the program kind of thing.
Right. I was speaking to them about my experience, and they said that I was even able to potentially do 3 years because of how intense I've already been in this
Okay.
industry. So I'm sure there's many ways about it, but it's not like anybody's going to get a shortcut simply because, I mean, you have to have a good background. Now, speaking about background, you said athletic therapist was where you came from. That
Yeah.
with all the muscle testing and the movements, in my course, we start in learning a bunch of this, and then we pick a direction after the second year,
Yeah.
after the first year. That must have been very helpful for going into
I loved
osteopathy.
it, and I really appreciate it because the one thing, like if I was going to say that there's one thing that osteopathy is missing, and again, I graduated a long time ago, so maybe it's different now, but at the time, you did not learn how to teach exercises. So that was something I was really grateful to have the athletic therapy background because to me, I don't want you to rely on the manual therapy. I want you to be able to maintain or build on what we've done on your own at home. And the exercises I think are super important. So the exercise portion of it is not something that I personally learned in the osteopathic program. That's something that the athletic therapy program gave me, and I'm so grateful. It's a beautiful compliment for sure.
Absolutely, I could imagine. So you talked about your initial consultation, and you say
Yep,
sometimes so it's for you specifically, it's an hour and a half to start,
yep.
and sometimes it's a lot of talking. So can you walk us briefly through what a client could expect from an initial consultation with you?
Yeah, for sure. So we go through a full medical history, but also kind of like the emotional and physical history, your sports, your habits. Has anything challenging from an emotional perspective happened in your life? And everything that the person shares, I'm making a mental note of what system do I want to go look at. Like, as an example, maybe you talk about you had ear infections when you were a toddler. I know that I'm going to check the ears, see if there's any scarring and anything related to the ears. I'm going to make a mental note to check that sort of thing. And then, like we talked about, I'm going to be watching your body language as you're talking about things. And if anything brings up any type of emotion, I'm going to know that, okay, I want to explore that system, but also try to work together to see if we can figure out why does this system bring up these emotions. And then after we do all of the medical history, emotional history, we then do a physical exam. That part would be fairly similar to an athletic therapy or physiotherapy evaluation where we're testing range of motion and perhaps strength. We're looking at posture, all of those sorts of things. There are a few other palpatory tests that we'll do as an osteopath that maybe are different than the other professions, but otherwise fairly similar. We'll do some tests in standing, we'll do some tests in lying down, and then based on all of that information between the physical tests and the talking, kind of trying to figure out a plan of action. And to me, it's really, I'm working as a team with that person. I am not there to fix you. I'm there to work with you so that we work together to try to figure out what does your body need to get back to that place of homeostasis where the system is in balance, the system is working as well as it can be. And often, like to really put it in a nutshell and oversimplify it, in osteopathy, we believe that everything in the body has a movement to it. So every muscle, fascia, bone, artery, ligament, lymph, viscera, everything has a movement to it. If the movement is expressing as it should, we usually have good health. But life is not like that. Life is challenging. We have injuries, we have traumas, we have posture, habits, all these different things. So we all have areas that are maybe sticky, that don't slide and glide as well. The body is fantastic at compensating for that. So it'll compensate and compensate and compensate until it can't compensate any longer. And usually it's when it can't compensate any longer, that's when you end up with a symptom that you say, I need to get this looked at. I can't deal with this anymore. So part of my job is working with you to figure out, okay, how can we get everything moving as it should so that your body doesn't have the need to express a symptom, because a symptom is pain is basically your body tapping you on the shoulder and saying, okay, Kevin, something's going on that you need to do something about. It doesn't tell us what the problem is, doesn't tell us where the problem is, and it doesn't tell us how bad the problem is, but it tells us that something needs your attention. And that's what typically brings people into my office.
And that's really, I guess, it's you just described really that holistic approach that an osteopath really has, right? So it's really
Yeah.
taking a look at everything, and yeah, it seems so overwhelming of a topic for a person who's not in it, but
Right.
I find that there's just so many parallels, not what we would both be working on, but just there's so many parallels with thinking about everything. And just, you have to think about everything, because the truth is, at the end of the day, if you don't think about it, then you're guaranteed not to be addressing it. But if you do and nothing works from it, then it's like, that's okay. At least we checked off a box. Because I'm sure you get some people in. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll have a client and I'm like, I know exactly how to deal with this. And then it doesn't work.
And
I'm
then
like,
they
what?
prove you wrong.
And they prove me wrong. I'm like, what? And it's great because they throw you the
It's
curveball.
so good.
But every human is so beautifully different.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden you do acquire all those, like, okay, I got option A. And then I got option B.
I got to go to option B.
And we got some options. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about, because it's a love of mine. It's, I think, the heart of my career, and it comes down to preventative care. Now, I love this. I don't think people should see. I spoke with our common friend that put us in touch, and I asked her. I said, I think I'm gonna need a massage. She's a massage therapist. I said, I think I'm gonna need a massage next week. And it's not that I have an issue. It's just that I'm going through a big move, and I'm like, I'm gonna be proactive.
Perfect.
And I feel like with osteopathy, I feel that if more people were just more proactive, let's not wait till this sticky situation, as you described it. Let's keep things fluid. So could you speak maybe a little bit about how this could contribute to the preventative healthcare that we can maybe expect?
Yeah, I completely agree. So my favorite time to see someone is when nothing is wrong, because when they're not dealing with an injury or a chronic issue, that's when I feel like I see the true terrain of their whole system, Whereas when you come with an injury, there's inflammation, there's compensation. So we have to kind of like clear all that away layer by layer by layer. And by the time I'm finally getting to see the true terrain, you're feeling better. And most people then don't come back because they're feeling better, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, like you just pointed out, the best time to see me is when nothing is wrong. Let me back up a second. I talk about something that I call the resiliency receptacle. We all have a threshold of how much threat we can handle in life. We're talking physical, emotional, psychological. It all goes into this one receptacle. And we have the capacity to handle a lot, but we all have a threshold. Once we reach that threshold, if one more thing happens, and it could be as simple as you go to change the position of your microphone, and now all of a sudden your neck is stuck for 3 weeks. It's not that there's something dramatically wrong with your neck. It's that you were at capacity and you had that one extra threat, and the system said, okay, I'm done. I can't do this for you anymore. I need you to take care of yourself a little bit better. So usually people come to me once they are past their threshold and they've been given that symptom. And that's fine. We can absolutely work with you then. And what we do is we work to sort of get you back to threshold. And if you keep seeing me, we try to get you below threshold so that you've got this space so that when challenges come in life, as they are always going to do, it only brings you back up to your threshold rather than spilling over the threshold.
Amazing.
So if you can come to me when nothing is wrong, then what we're doing is we're taking more and more out of that threat bucket. And so we're creating more and more space, more and more resiliency, so stuff can happen, and great, your system will handle it because it has that capacity. It's really only once we're at our threshold that it loses that capacity.
Wow.
So come to us when you don't need us, and that's when you're going to build that resilience.
Yeah, I feel that even though osteopathy is fairly, like, I've always known about them, and I'm fairly new for me to actually have used an osteopath, but it feels that there's more and more and more and more use as we speak about. I'm thinking about, like, pro athletes. I'm thinking about the everyday, person. There's so many things. And I think if somebody could just understand, it's so much easier to deal with prevention than it is to deal with recovery.
So much easier.
And if we just have somebody,
and so much less expensive.
I was actually just going to say that. You took the words from my mouth. Because people look at it and they go, okay, I just did a session. It cost this, but I don't feel like much was done. And it's like, well, the truth is that if we keep on having, like, let's say a tune-up, you go see your osteopath for a tune-up, And let's say that
Yep.
tune-up is like every second week. I don't know. And it's like, okay, I go see for a tune-up every second week and it costs X amount of dollars. Well, that could be preventative for, I mean, in the States, it's so expensive as far as healthcare, but that could
Yeah.
be, that could mean you could work longer, spend more time with loved ones. It's really
Yeah.
cost efficient, actually, when you break it
It
down.
really is. It really is. And honestly, if you do come for those tune-ups, it doesn't usually have to be as often as you just said. Like the people who come for tune-ups, I think of it like changing the oil on your car, you know? Like for some people do come once a month, but I have some that come 2, 3 times a year, and that's enough to keep them in a good place where stuff can happen and their system's resilient enough to handle it, you know?
Yeah.
Everyone's different, of course. Everybody's unique, but yeah, finding that rhythm that works for you is great. But yeah, to spend that little bit as prevention really means that you don't get the big thing that happens and then now you need 6 months of treatment because you're in this crisis, you know?
That's amazing. Before I went back to school, well, I'm not going to get into the whole story, but I got into running specifically for a client because he said, "Oh, I want to run a marathon," and I'm the type of trainer to be like, "I'll do it with you," and I didn't know
Okay, great.
anything. I knew nothing
That's
about it,
awesome.
so I was like, "I'm going to do this with you." I learned. I read the books. I tried everything I could, and I learned, and then we also learned with him. And a young man he's like a brother to me, and I I'm bringing this up because I went on to running ultras and doing very, very long distances, and
Okay.
I would go see my chiropractor as a tune up, but I didn't know osteopathy was not
Yep.
part of my vocabulary. I knew
Yep.
it, I knew what it was, and I was introduced to the chiropractor, so I just said, "Oh, I'll go this route." But then I always thought he was different. I was like, he doesn't just go and crack. I later found out that he has a background in osteopathy.
Oh, too funny.
So I was like, oh, now I
That's
understand
great.
why I got along with him. But I'm a very firm believer on it's all about prevention.
You want to hear the best prevention? There are parts of Europe where they have an osteopath in the delivery room. And so the
Amazing.
baby gets evaluated right away. And look, it's a traumatic thing. Like it's natural. We all do it. That's the way we come into this world, but it's not nothing.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of sometimes just little stickiness that we talked about
Yeah.
before that happen in the baby that may turn into something later on in life, may not, but why not give them the cleanest slate possible from day one? And I just think
Amazing.
so for myself, when people have a baby, I say as soon as a mom you're ready to leave the house, just bring them for a little checkup, and
Amazing.
it's so easy to help them when they're fresh and new like that. There are no habits, there are
Amazing.
no outside influences, you know. So if there's
Yeah.
something, it's so easy to just deal with it and it's done.
And I'm assuming it's very non-intrusive, nothing for
Oh,
any mother to worry
it's
about.
so light. Yeah, the pressure that we use on a newborn is so light. And what I find fascinating, so on an adult, we learn techniques, right? Where
Hmm.
we have to move your body in certain positions and our hands are placed a very particular way. In a newborn, you put like 2 fingers, let's say on a vertebrae that's rotated, just as an example. I don't do anything to the vertebrae. I put my 2 fingers there, and the baby is so intuitive that they do whatever movement is necessary to fix it. So it's
Ah,
so fascinating to see that we are all born with that intuition. We lose it somewhere along the way because we're sort of trained not to listen to our bodies, unfortunately. But I think that part of the best prevention is learning to listen to the messages from our bodies, because it's telling us all we need to know. We're just not trained in how to listen.
I find that so
But we were
unique.
we were
Yeah.
born with that.
It's crazy because just yesterday I was speaking with one of my morning clients and I just it was almost the exact topic. I'm like, man, we unlearn so much. We
Exactly.
come into this world just having these reflexes, deep squats. We have this ability, our body's moving,
Yep.
and then we just unlearn everything.
We unlearn it, or we actually are trained to ignore it. Like, think of if you watch a newborn and a toddler, they're constantly in motion. But then as they get to like school age, we start to teach them, oh, you have to be still when you're in class, or when you're at the dinner table, or when there's company, or you're in a place of worship. So we start to ignore the messages that tell us that we should be moving now. And we say, oh, no, I can't. I have to be still because that's what's polite.
Mhm.
And so that's what we're trained to do. And so
Hmm.
decades later, you get an injury or something chronic, your body's telling you all kinds of information, but you no longer know how to interpret what it's saying.
Amazing.
And so to me, that's a big part of the recovery is figuring out what your body's telling you because it's telling you.
That's amazing. I'm sure in your whole career, if someone were to ask me in school, sometimes people would ask me this because I'm the when I'm in school, there's no way people look at me and they're like, I look young, but I don't look like 22. So like this guy, who's this guy? Is he the teacher? And people will always, they will often ask me, do you have a success story? And it's tough because, like I said, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. To think about a specific success story,
Hmm.
it's tough. But do you have maybe one success story that you could share with us?
Same as you. There's so many that it's hard to pick one. Can I share a couple of short ones?
Yeah, yeah, for
Is that
sure.
okay?
For sure. Absolutely.
Just a couple that highlight how it's all interconnected. So there's one woman who had come to me for years for other things, but she got cancer. She had liver cancer at first. I helped her with that, and then she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And in both cases, so two things. She would come to me for the nausea that she got as a result of the chemo. And we figured out like if she came 2 days after the chemo, that was the best way that we could really nip the nausea. So, and that's huge. If you're someone who's gone through chemo, that nausea can be debilitating. So that was huge. But the other interesting thing with her was she would get symptoms in her intestines. So her either bloating or constipation or diarrhea, just something would be off in her intestines. And she would come to me, we would work on it. But through the talking, instead of just working on her intestines, we would talk about it. And we figured out that there was so much fear around anything she felt in her intestines because in both cases of her cancer diagnoses, it started with symptoms in her intestines. So she didn't realize it, but anytime she felt something in the gut, unconsciously her mind was going, shoot, my cancer has spread or I have a new cancer. So once we were able to figure that out, she was able to acknowledge that, work on the fear, and realize, no, it's because I was stressed because XYZ was happening in my life. And whenever I'm stressed, it goes to my gut. And as soon as she recognized that connection, she was able to breathe her way through it and use mindset. And she didn't need to come and see me to help her with her intestinal issues, which
That's
is
amazing.
huge,
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
I had another guy who he also had cancer, but I didn't see him while he had cancer. I saw him after. It was a pretty huge surgery that he had. Um, he had cancer of the psoas. So they removed the psoas, part of the iliacus, part of the QL. They removed the transverse processes from L1 to L4, the nerve roots from L1 to L4. So
Are
they
we
thought that he would never walk
are
again
we talking
because
about a
they,
specific side or is it
yes,
both
on one
sides?
side,
Okay, okay.
on one side.
Okay.
So the surgeons figured he'd be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life because they took the nerve roots from the nerves that supply the leg, right?
Right. For
But he
most people,
said,
for anybody watching right now, that's like the whole like left or right, whole hip area basically.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
the whole information system to the leg. So
Right.
they wanted to amputate the leg. And he said, absolutely not. You do not have my permission. I will walk again. And he did. And it's fascinating that the nerves that contract the quads, he did not have those nerves anymore. But after a couple years, he was able to get a quad contraction. So just one of those examples where it doesn't make sense in theory, it doesn't make sense on paper, but the body is so resilient that when it can't find one way, it figures out another path.
Right.
So fast forward a few years in for him, and he had a lot of lymphedema. His legs were like the size of tree trunks. His testicles were the size of grapefruits. There was so much swelling. And I did everything you could think of for the lymphatic system, the circulatory system, and I would make a bit of a dent. It would come down slightly, but nothing that was enough that it was really changing the function. So after a few treatments, I said, okay, I need to step back. I need to look at this differently because what I'm doing is not working. And I said, I'm going to forget that he's got lymphedema. I'm going to evaluate him as though I've never seen him before. And I'm going to treat what jumps out at me. And what jumped out at me was how much his eyes weren't moving. So I treated his eyes. And within that session, his legs just went, and they just shrank back down to normal. And to this day, I just saw him a few weeks ago, actually. And this story was from about 15 years ago. And when he walked in, he says, Every time I think of you, I think of that day when you treated my eyes and my legs shrank back down to normal. And it's just one of those fascinating examples where it's not something that you would think of doing. But when I stopped trying to be in my brain and I just trusted that his body had the answer was there.
Yeah, I think that's just so amazing because it allows people to realize that it's not luck. Like, I mean, what you're doing is not luck. It's
Right.
it's thought. You are actually thinking. It's not some sort of hocus
Not voodoo.
pocus. It's not voodoo, which is very important because sometimes, people, it could come, you mentioned the word worship. It could come to a lot of different things where we have to realize this is just a holistic approach where you're not trying to tap into something. It's you learned how to tap into something. You learned how to
Oh, it is strongly
recognize.
based in science, the
Exactly.
anatomy that we learn. And what I really appreciated too about the anatomy, so two things. So I learned anatomy and athletic therapy, but when I learned anatomy and athletic therapy, it was all as separate parts. So it was fascinating and I loved it. But in osteopathy, we learned anatomy in terms of how it was all connected, and we learned embryology. And embryology tells the story of the anatomy. And when you understand the story of the embryology, the anatomy just makes sense. You no longer have to memorize where things are or why they're where they are because embryology tells you the story of how they ended up there in the first place and how it's all interconnected. So it's
Very,
it's it's pretty cool. So yeah,
very cool.
osteopathy can seem like voodoo because it helps so many things, but it is strongly rooted in science.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. I love that. Um, whenever, whenever someone's out there and they're gonna go choose an osteopath,
Yeah,
what are is there any tips for us? Because for me, I knew nothing. I was just like, who can I see right now?
right,
And
right.
it's the person who's giving me contact. It's just like, here's a number. But what about for how do we fish through? Like, yeah, what's some advice? What's some advice
Yeah.
for finding
So
an osteopath?
the important thing is that they're actually an osteopath because you can take courses that have osteopathic techniques, but doesn't make you an osteopath. So the DO is a designation, capital D, capital O. It stands for Diploma of Osteopathy here in Montreal anyway. So you want to look for someone who's a DO. Having said that, it's such a long program that after 3 years you're able to start treating, but it's a different designation. And I'm sorry, the letters are different than when I was in school, so I'm not sure what the letters are, but there is a different designation for people who are not yet officially an osteopath, but they're in training. So that also is okay, and I'm sure you can find that information online. But then the other part to me, Kevin, is that therapeutic alliance, that you can go and see the most incredible osteopath, but if it's not the right fit personality wise or energetically, then that's not the right osteo for you. So for myself, when I'm referred, like sometimes I'm not the right osteopath for the people who come to see me. So I don't just try to look for an osteo who's got the right techniques for them. I try to look for someone who I know they're going to gel with. So if you know someone in your life who's going to an osteopath, I would go by word of mouth for something like this. It's not osteo to me is not something you go to the yellow pages for and just look someone up online.
Right.
You might get lucky and land on a fantastic person, but there's so that therapeutic alliance is such a big part of it
Mhm.
that if you go to someone and maybe they've got great skills but you're not comfortable or you don't feel safe, then just try somebody else. And to me, it's like looking for a psychologist. There are amazing psychologists out there, but they're not all going to be the right one for you.
Yeah,
And it is worth it to take the time to find the person that's right for you. That's my opinion.
absolutely. I just spoke about that today, and I mean, without getting too much into it, it comes down to that. I think the exact words mentioned today was, you could have the perfect technique, and if you don't have that word, the therapeutic alliance, if you don't
Yeah.
have that connection, a lot of times when people want to train with me, I'll always tell them, why don't you just come in, just have a conversation. Just come.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just talk. If you want to do a little training, we can do a little training. It's no problem. But let's see if we mesh, because for whatever reason, if someone's training, they're often training, 2-3 times a week.
Yeah, you've
They're
got
gonna
to
get to
got to
know
get
me.
along.
Yeah,
You got to like to
exactly.
be in your company for sure. And
Exactly.
nowadays, since COVID, a lot of us as professionals have stuff online. So
Hmm.
sometimes when people reach out to me, I'll say, "Look, go to my YouTube channel or my Instagram or Facebook and see. does how I speak even resonate with you? Because if my voice is grating to you, you're not going to like being with me for an hour, you know? So
Right,
take a
right.
look and see if my approach resonates with you. And if it doesn't, let me know and I'll refer you to somebody else.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, before we leave off, what do you think is the future of osteopathy? Is there any changes coming our way? What's on you? What do you think?
Yeah, so one big change that I'm not well versed to speak on, but is we're trying to become our own professional order. So it's been in the works for a few years. L'Ordre des Professions du Québec, where we've got a request in, I guess is how you do it, and we're waiting for that designation. So I'm not fully well versed on all the ways that that will change our profession, but the one thing it does is protect the public, so that if you're going to see an osteopath, you know that they've all got that same encadrement, that they've
Yeah.
all got the same kind of training, they all meet the same requirements, which right now is not the case. There are a lot of different schools and they don't all have the same, I can't think of the word. So that's one element that's in the works.
Okay.
My hope, and I don't know that it'll happen in my lifetime, but my hope and my wish is that we would see more working together with the medical system,
Yeah.
that more doctors would understand the benefits of working with an osteopath. Like, for an example that's been wonderful, in the last, I would say, probably 15 years, so many babies are born with reflux. They're born with either food intolerances or allergies that give them terrible reflux, which is very painful for them. And the standard protocol is to put them on Zantac for a year. Zantac is a pretty
Yeah.
intense medication, even for an adult,
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
look, if they need it, fine. But I have a few pediatricians that when that happens, their first instinct is to refer them to me. And if there's something that I can do as an osteopath that helps the baby to avoid being on Zantac, or to get off Zantac after a couple of months instead of being on it for a whole year, well, that could change their whole trajectory for the rest of their lives.
Oh yeah.
So, and back pain, like back pain is the most common complaint that people have. Most people either go to their GP or to the ER, but really the only thing that can be done there is to give you medication.
Right.
And maybe you need medication to get through that challenge, but that's not going to get to the root of what caused the issue, right? So an osteopath would be a great referral in those moments. And we're not quite there yet. There's more and more. I definitely get more medical referrals now than I did when I started 20 years ago. And then there are still doctors who have no idea what osteopathy is or what osteopaths do. So I hope that we're moving towards a place where the two
Yeah.
systems meet a little better, so that we could help take the burden
Yeah.
off the medical system that is so overwhelmed right now,
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think the whole system needs to work a little bit better together in general. I think
Yeah,
if we start working as a team, that would be amazing. Um,
exactly.
well, look, that being said, how can someone find you, potentially contact you? What are some ways that they could do that before we leave off?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on social media and I have free stuff all the time because I want people to have access to things. So on Instagram, it's _ stillness in motion. On Facebook, it's stillness in motion. And on YouTube, it's stillness in motion with Colleen Jorgensen. I have a website, colleenjorgensen.org. And if you want to come and see me in person for osteopathy, the best way is to email me. I don't know if you
Yeah.
have show
Yeah.
notes that I can give you that for after.
Yeah, I'm going to put all these in a link down
Perfect.
below.
And I also have an online pain care program because I can only see people one at a time and I wanted to be able to help more people. So during COVID, I created an online pain care program that has been so helpful for people. So that's an option that you can do on your own, at your own rhythm. And I give you all the tools that you need to help yourself, so that you don't need to come and see me. Then come and see me for the tune-ups, but you don't need me to help you through the day-to-day, because that's the tools that I'm giving you in the program. And that's called Dare to Heal.
Amazing. So, like I mentioned, I'll put all of those down below, all the links that people could simply
Perfect.
click on and get there. I love that. Colleen, it was such a massive pleasure to have this ability to talk with you.
It
I
was
have,
great to meet you and chat.
yes, same here. I have a feeling that I'll be seeing you in my future. I'm the type of person to hurt myself often enough. I learned by the process, so I'm sure
I'm
we'll.
surprised our paths haven't crossed before now because we seem to have a lot of crossover in what we've done and how
Yeah.
we think and how we work. So
Well, as I
I'm sure our paths are going to keep crossing
they're
now.
going to keep crossing. I have a little bit more knowledge about exactly what this is, and I see a huge use for me, and I got a little one on the way. So
Yes,
well, I'm sure we're going to be,
I would love to treat your little one.
yes, we can have a little recap convo. But thank you so much, Colleen, for your time
My
today.
pleasure.
And that being said, take care, and we'll speak soon enough.
Perfect. Thanks for having me on.
Take care, Colleen. Bye bye.